Welcome to Eric's Perspective. Joining me today is Charmaine Jefferson, who at one time was the executive director of the California African American Museum, and we're going to explore what she's up to nowadays. I'm coming to you from my gallery, M. Hanks Gallery in Fullerton, and she is, I'm presuming, in Los Angeles. Are you at home, Charmaine?
I am at home.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And
I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. So I mentioned that you were the a former executive director, but before going to that point and getting beyond that, I just wanted to kind of wind the clock back a little bit and ask if you wouldn't mind telling and sharing with us how you got started in the arts.
Wow. I have to tell you one. When I was 3, I started taking ballet.
Ah.
And kept at it till I was 12. And I used to be a dancer professionally. Did it for about 9 years. So I was always in the arts as a performer. But I was also always surrounded by art. I cannot draw a lick. A straight line with a ruler is about it. But my uncle is an artist, John Riddle, Jr.
Yeah.
And my brother is an artist. He's younger than me. And my aunt, Judy, had artistic talent. So I was always surrounded by it.
Yeah.
But it's just always been in my life. So I went into arts administration when I stopped dancing professionally.
Excellent. And when you were dancing, what form of dance? Was it still ballet by the time you became
I started training in ballet. I'm born and raised here in Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
And I started training in ballet here in LA with a woman named Carolyn Snowden, who at the time I didn't actually know as much about as I do now, but she was one of the Hollywood dancers who was in movies and etc. I ran across a picture, the wonders of the internet, is that I ran across a picture of her about a year and a half ago, and girlfriend was in a full 6 o'clock with her leg up, and the woman I had met who taught us dance was, older and very heavy, and
yeah,
it's but nice as she could be. I had no idea. She taught me ballet in her garage.
Oh my goodness.
On La Brea, about 2 doors down from where the freeway is right now, La Brea and Adams.
No way. That is awesome.
Yep.
And so are you still in touch in any way now, or?
Well, she would be long past by this time.
She passed away.
I was about to go on toe shoes. I was going on toe shoes about 12. And then that's about the same time that you start to, want to hang out with your friends and boys and other things that come to mind that you probably shouldn't be spending time on. And just when I was thinking about not dancing, because it was all I ever really wanted to do, Dance Theater of Harlem came to town and did the Funky Chicken on Toe Shoes at the Inner City Cultural Center. I will never forget it.
Ah.
And I was blown away.
Yeah.
And my dance bug was right back again. And this was, and by that time now we're starting to get into the era of where we've gone from being Negro and colored to Black.
Yes.
So naturals are in and all of that other kind of stuff. So I started doing Afro dance, or what we then called, Afro dance, because we didn't know which continent, which country it came from.
Right.
We just knew it came from the motherland.
There you go.
And so we put it all together, and I started dancing with a company called Arwanda Lewis Dance Company. And Arwanda Lewis had been another hooker out there in the streets. She had a dance company, a dance school and company, and it was located on Adams, almost around the corner from where I had taken ballet.
Oh, wow.
And I first met, and she had a dance company, so I started dancing with her. But I had trained in ballet and wanted to do modern. I wanted to be a concert dancer, as opposed to a show, movie kind of dancer. And though back in that day, if you wanted to do show work, you couldn't possibly be a serious dancer.
I see.
So I wanted to do concert work, which is what I really liked. I wanted to be expressive. I wasn't really interested in choreography, although I later went on to do some I definitely wasn't interested in teaching dance, although I went on some, because sooner or later you realize you have to eat.
Yeah.
Um, and I went to UCLA, and I got my undergrad in dance, with the blessings of my mother and my father looking at me going, "So what happens if you break your leg?" And lucky for me, my mother had her own business as a legal secretary, so I always knew how to type and handle a dictating machine and other devices that people don't use anymore. And so in between dance gigs, I worked in law offices and temp work.
Oh.
But I went to UCLA to get my undergrad in dance. And at that time, UCLA had the best dance department in the country.
Oh, wow.
And I was lucky to get, I was very fortunate to have gotten in, especially since my mother had gone there, but that wasn't the reason why I got in. Went into their dance department. And, but I started dancing professionally when I was about 16 years old. And it would be gigs. I mean, here in LA in those days, there were not a lot of dance companies. So it was a lot of pickup work. That's when I had to get out of my, holier than thou, I'm only going to be a concert dancer frame of mind. And so I ended up doing things where I was dancing and singing and acting and modeling and other stuff like that in between gigs, and wound up being the Missouri manufacturing natural comb model.
No way. Are there any photographs of that at some point
we
can see?
There are. And actually, if I manage to figure out how to pick it up and send it to you, I will, so that you can feel free to drop it in anytime you want to.
Oh my God, that would be fantastic. I would love to see it.
As a matter of fact, there were, in exchange, this is the life of a dancer.
Yeah.
Okay, so UCLA, I get my undergrad. I also take classes at the Inner City Cultural Center, where I had the great fortune of being able to work with Donald McHale, the late Donald McHale. In addition to Rwanda Lewis, I managed to get into a couple of movies every now and then and some other stuff. But in exchange, you're a dancer, right?
Yeah.
You have no money. I mean, you have money for a minute, and then the next minute you don't have anything. So I needed my portfolio. So there was a photographer out in Compton or Watts, one of the two. And he got the gig to take some pictures of some naturals for this home package. And I needed a portfolio. So in exchange, he did my portfolio, because you couldn't go out on gigs without a portfolio.
Right.
And I had this perfect fro. Now, in case some of your listeners are not aware of what that means, in that day, your fro was perfect. And after you combed it out, you get a scarf, wring the water out of it, put it on your head, and pat it. And that's how you got a perfect fro. And nobody was supposed to touch it. Well, so anyway, he took my pictures, and they wanted my picture, and my picture ended up being on the comb, on the package, and they had about 10 different comb styles.
Yeah.
And so it was on there for about maybe 10, 12 years. And sometimes it was in liquor stores and beauty stores, which gave my cousins, they just loved it, because they'd go into the liquor store and go, "That's my cousin."
So wait, did you have anybody come up to you on the street and say, "Hey, wait a minute, I recognize you"?
No, nobody ever did that. One time, my mother and by this time I had already moved to New York. I got my master's in dance education at NYU, and I had moved to New York and was still dancing professionally, but was there. And I came back home, and my mother and I went to Century City. And we parked our car. I went to get out of the car, and then I screamed. And she said, "What's the matter?" And I had taken my foot out of the car, put it down. Now, this is Century City's parking lot. And there was a package, the natural comb package. Somebody had taken a comb out of it. And there weren't that many people hanging around Century City in those days.
Right.
Taken a comb out of it and left the package on the ground. And of all the parking spaces in that place, pulled into the one where I opened the door and put my foot on my own face.
So that's just pure coincidence.
Pure coincidence. And every now and then I will be on, one time I was looking for the company because I wanted to see if they were still around, to ask them to do something for a client.
Uh-huh.
And I went on, you Google something.
Yeah.
And the package came up on eBay.
Wow.
So every now and then
it pops up.
Some of the necrocombs pop up on eBay.
You're going to have me looking on eBay now. I mean, I'm just dying with curiosity over here.
Yeah, literally, I can send it to you. It is not that hard.
Oh, yeah. Please. I hope you will remember. You know what? I'm going to bug you.
I even have the original photo from which it was taken.
Oh my God. I've got to see this, and you have to be sure to send it to me.
So the life of a dancer is that you act, you model, you sing, you dance, whatever it is you can do.
Yeah.
You try to get your parts. I was in the some of them were fun, like the opening sequence. I think it was for a dance sequence for the opening episode of Buck Rogers.
Buck Rogers, really?
All three you could get. The Buck Rogers television program.
Yeah, right. It was a series.
It runs like late at night, and it's really terrible. And so there we were, and what their idea of the future was in the 70s. In these really awful outfits, but we were dancing.
Yeah.
Futuristic dances with big cone head hats.
That's awesome.
Or the time when because back in those days, if you were a dancer and you were going to get put on a show or a movie, there was only going to be one Black person, maybe two if they wanted them to partner, and then there would be a male.
I see.
And then you'd end up in these situations where, what shade of Black are you? So I would go in between being too light enough, and not dark enough. Oh,
okay.
And on top of it, you have, there was a class of dancers. Every group of dancers has a class above them, etc. Who had their inroad into the industry, and they were really, really good. One of them I remember are Lorraine and some others who danced on the Carol Burnett show, because back in those days the variety shows were still on.
Yeah.
And so they danced on those shows, etc. But so you knew when you went out to audition, then more likely than not, you might not get it, not because you weren't good enough, but because they were only going to pick one or two.
I see. In other words, it was a narrow door through which to pass.
Yeah, you treat an audition as if it was a free class.
Right.
And then that way you didn't lose your mind if it didn't go right. But so I can remember the ones where Lula Washington of the Lula Washington Dance Theater went to UCLA with me, and we used to dance together actually at Rwanda's and in another company that I was in, Margalito Red Dance Theater, that I toured the country with, and Margalite was Yemenite. But we would go to auditions, and like Lula got Grease. I didn't get Grease. Or the time when they did the remake of King Kong. So this one maybe your listeners will enjoy. When Dino De Laurentiis went to remake King Kong, so they obviously are going to end up in the dark continent, and people are going to dance in the dark continent. Not a problem. The African style dance was in them. It's going to be great. It must have been every Black dancer in Los Angeles was in that movie. There was one time where all of us got hired.
So I was going to say that was like the direct opposite of your experience up to that point.
All of us got hired. So we're there on the first day, and we are, dancing away. We got it, and we're representing the continent. And several of us that night got a call. And what we discovered was that all of us that got the call weren't dark enough.
So the call was a rejection call.
We were already hired. I mean, I got paid for part of the movie, but but we only did like a day, right?
I see.
And so when they looked at it in the camera, they were like, I mean, this is my interpretation. Those people are too light. They don't look like Black Africans. That's my interpretation.
I see.
And so we all got let go, and they went to where they figured the dark Black people were, and they went to Watts and pulled people off the street
who were not necessarily dancers,
so that they would all look like they were Black Africans. Whatever it was going through Dino De Laurentiis' head. I
see.
And so we all found this out like the next day or whatever, because they didn't tell us. They just said, okay, well, you're not going to be needed anymore. That happens, right? Then you started to find out that there were a whole bunch of us, and then what did we have in common? And the folks who were left behind, who we knew, told us what happened. That they'd let us go, hired a bunch of people that were darker because we weren't dark enough. And then they tried to ask them to dance topless.
Topless, you said?
Yes. Well, now you realize you don't see anything like that in the movie.
Right.
It occurred to them that this needed to look authentic enough, I guess.
Right.
But this was also during the time period of Black is Beautiful. And those Black people who were as activated as the Black Lives Matter are today, ripped Dino De Laurentiis a new one and said, oh, hell no.
So they refused to do that.
Oh, they said, this is not happening. No.
I see.
They were not going to go for the stereotype, which is why if you go back and ever look at the King Kong movie, at least from the dancing point of view, you do not get what might have been the stereotype of what they would have delivered.
I see.
But he almost went to deliver it.
So, Charmaine, for how long were you dancing professionally?
About 9 years. And
then what prompted you to switch gears? And then I'm assuming that's when you decided to go to law school?
I had, almost after that. I had been dancing. I was touring. And like I said, I was also touring with the Margarita Vet Dance Company and doing a couple of pieces that she had created for us. I had also danced with the UCLA Dance Company and came back and decided that I probably should get my master's, because just in case, then I could probably teach at a university in between gigs and stuff. And I deliberately went into dance education instead of just a plain dance degree, because I knew that would get me, more attention.
Right.
And I was being strategic about it.
Right.
And at NYU, and decided at the last minute that, I should go to New York. So I went to New York. I'm there. I'm dancing away. And then I was offered an opportunity. I applied for an opportunity to get an internship at the National Endowment for the Arts. And I simultaneously determined that, started thinking I wasn't going to dance anymore. And I sat down and I cried about it. It was like something hit me that I knew that I wanted to explore some other things, and I didn't know how to dance halfway. Some people love the classroom and the rehearsal.
Right.
I wanted to dance. I wanted to perform, and all those other things were a means to an end.
I see.
And when I realized that I might want to do some other things, I said, well, I'll go do this. I applied for an NEA internship, and there was a job open at the same time, and I applied, and I actually got accepted to both, but the two didn't know it. And I accepted the job, and I became a senior dance program specialist at the National Endowment for the Arts, and went there in 1979, and said, well, I'll try this for a year, and maybe I'll go back to dancing. And when I made the decision not to go back to dancing, I applied to law school.
And what attracted you to law specifically, as opposed to some other field?
It's the only other thing that had been in my life. It's the one thing that had been in my life my whole life. Like I said, my mother was a legal secretary. I was around lawyers all the time. Because I could type, unlike other artists, I never waited tables. I worked a restaurant. I worked tent services. So I worked in offices.
I see.
And a lot of times in law offices. And my mother had her own legal secretarial service at home before people did that kind of stuff.
Right.
In order to be home with us. So therefore I was always around it and would help her and etc. And I had been president of the high school. I believed in justice. I was a protester. I was a hippie. I was all those things.
Right.
Um, and it put me in a position where the one thing I thought I would do, I had done professionally. I was so very grateful for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't want to leave the arts.
That's a beautiful thing. Just if you don't, I just wanted to point out. I mean, later on, you become an arts administrator, so now you're able to blend your sensitivity and background as a performing artist and an artist together with the other side of the story, which is more maybe administrative and business oriented and so forth. Right?
I was fortunate because the woman who hired me, Rhoda Brower, had been the manager of Twyla Park and had also been the manager of ABT. And when she became the director of the dance program at the NEA, this is in Washington, D.C., for those who don't know where it's located, she wanted to hire someone who actually had worked in the field and been in dance. Mm-hmm. And it paid that I, by this time, had my undergrad, my master's in dance education. As a matter of fact, when they offered me the job, it was to start in like February, January of 1979. And I wasn't supposed to graduate till June. Mm-hmm. And I had to go into the chairman and say, look, I've got this job opportunity. We need to speed this up. And I knew far enough in advance to be able to speed it up. And I doubled my classes. So I got out of NYU with my master's in 3 semesters.
Wow, that's fantastic.
When I think about it now, I can't imagine that it ever would have happened. but then, it's what dancers do. Dance is a 24/7, because you're always living with your instrument.
Right.
And so you're always just disciplined to keep working mm-hmm. and doing work. And I was very grateful for it.
Eventually in New York, you became, please correct me, I'm trying to remember now, was it the deputy, what was the position you were for in New York City, right?
While at the National Endowment for the Arts, when I made the decision that I was going to stop dancing, I applied to law school and I went to Georgetown at nighttime. So I worked about 60 hours a week for the NEA, was the senior dance program specialist, and organized the site visit system that allowed them to expand who they see. Because it was very narrowly defined. Went to Georgetown, 4-year program at nighttime, got out, practiced law one summer, was practicing law, doing litigation at a law firm called Holland & Knight, big firm in Florida that had lots of offices. I wanted their DC office. They wanted me to come to Tampa. I was like, oh, okay. And Arthur Mitchell called while I was practicing law. And he said, I want you to come run Dance Theater Harlem with me. And I thought,
wow, that must have been an awesome experience to have.
Yeah.
Answer the phone and it's him.
It's gonna happen.
Right.
I looked at my law books. I looked at my law loans. And I went, I can't, and that's when you're an artist destined to be poor the rest of your life.
Right.
So I left and went to become general manager of Dance Theater.
So you were the general manager of Dance Theater of Harlem for how long, by the way?
I was there for 2.5 years before Mary Schmidt Campbell, God bless her, I love her, who was head of Studio Museum in Harlem, brought me in, contacted me and said she was getting ready to become Commissioner of Cultural Affairs for the city of New York. Yeah. She came to me and said, I want to talk to you about the possibility of coming in as my deputy with me. And we talked and etc. And with Arthur Mitchell's blessing, I left. And so she was commissioner and I was deputy commissioner. So Harlem was all up in New York City.
Wow.
When we went in the 80s.
That must have been an incredible experience. What was that like, working as deputy commissioner
Oh,
of cultural
man.
affairs?
Well, leave it to Mary and I to have walked in just when the financial crisis hit
Right.
New York. And so then we had to go running around, cutting people's budgets and all kinds of other things. But it was fabulous. There was the opportunity to do a couple of things. And this is how I really got into being closer to museums. Because remember, now my first love is as a dancer, as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always surrounded by art. It was everywhere. It was in our house everywhere. So visual art was fine. But that job gave me a chance to start to be engaged with all kinds of institutions, and including capital renovation, capital construction projects, and board service, and other things. I'd always done a lot of charitable work, but board service, I sat ex officio on the board of the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Oh.
And Carnegie Hall. That job was...
This is in your capacity as deputy commissioner of cultural affairs, you're saying?
This is after I left DTH, because I was at DTH twice. This is after I left the first time to go be with Mary.
Okay.
And while we were there, Mary got pregnant with her youngest son, and who's now a grown man. And and so I was acting commissioner. And then she went, and then she came back, and then she left to go be the dean at NYU, and I became acting commissioner again. So we came in under Ed Koch,
mm-hmm.
and then we were renewed under David Dinkins.
Ah.
It's amazing what an extraordinary opportunity it was, because that agency covered everything from art museums and dance companies and performing houses to botanical gardens and science centers. And New York City alone probably had close to, at that time, about 2,500 arts organizations.
Right. And some of the oldest museums in the country.
Yeah. So natural history. So I got to stand on the roof of natural history and help solve a problem with roofers when water was coming into the building, and help support. Mary came up with a great idea that we got a chance to put together, which was to help people who were living in temporary housing. These are homeless.
Just ordinary people, not necessarily artists.
Just regular people who were living in what we would refer to as a homeless shelter, but we were referred to as temporary housing.
Uh-huh.
Because their kids would often miss going on field trips.
Oh, wow, that's sad.
Because they weren't always in the same school.
Right.
And they were moving around. And a lot of times they didn't have the same experience that other kids did. And we wanted them to have the sense of feeling like they owned the museums as much as everybody else. And so literally we put together a program with the Board of Education, with the cultural institutions, and they had after school programs. So they'd come in after school weekend, and we had buses for them. They'd come in after school, they had homework help, they'd have some nutrition, and then they got to partake in programs in the museum, just like other people did. And their families often could join them.
What a great exposure. I mean, that's fantastic.
Number of things I was so really proud of, having had the opportunity to be a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of them, as well as the public art programs.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the public art that's all around the city, and being there to redo Times Square and create the Joyce Theater, and just so many things that when I go into New York now, including the Museum of the American Indian,
mm-hmm.
I had the privilege of being part of the team.
That's not the museum in DC, is this? There
were actually two of them, one in New York City and Manhattan,
uh-huh.
that were being formed at the same time.
I see.
And one in DC. And so I sat on the advisory body for both.
Oh.
And got to be a part of putting that of putting that together as they were making it happen because of the role that I had in New York.
Uh-huh.
But there's also, the African burial ground in Manhattan.
Now, near Wall Street, right?
Down near Wall Street. When I was there, when they, discovered the remains and went through the effort to try to build up that particular location.
Mm-hmm.
And the federal building that is there, selecting the work. Kinshasa Conwell was on that panel with me, along with several others. Barbara Chase Rabeau's work that's there.
Mm-hmm.
Houston Conwell's work that's in the floor. Because the Percent for Art program also fell under my jurisdiction at Cultural Affairs. So I got a chance to work the Houston Conwell work in the grounds at the Schomburg. I mean, there are so many things that when I look back, I go, how fortunate I was to be able to touch and be engaged in some of the kinds of projects that were a really big deal, not only when they happened, but remain a big deal to this day. But the African burial ground in Lower Manhattan is probably one of my biggest prides.
Yeah, it was just an incredible thing when I read about it. And like you were saying, these artists were brought in to basically memorialize the site, right? Is that a correct way of putting it?
And through art.
Right.
I mean, and when you get Barbara Chase Rabeau, when she does anything, it's magnificent. And then you got no one better than Houston Conwell knew how to take a site and figure out how to embed it into the facility,
mm-hmm.
but have it be an extraordinary piece of artwork.
Yeah.
And there are pieces of his in a couple of places in the city, but the entrance floor of the Schomburg, and if you go into the federal building, down near the African burial ground, you see Houston Conwell's work. And there are several other artists whose work is there as well.
Well, let that be a notice to everybody listening and viewing. Please put that on your to-do list. Of course, once we get past this pandemic situation, be sure to stop and see that as soon as possible.
When I left, I went back to Dance Theater Harlem and built their expansion building. But I couldn't have done it if I hadn't had that experience in cultural affairs.
Oh, absolutely. So now, how did you end up in Los Angeles as the executive director of the California African American Museum?
Well, it was time when I left Dance Theater Harlem the second time in the role of executive director, having built their expansion and the South Africa tour to break down the apartheid in South Africa and so many wonderful things. I am so extraordinarily grateful for both the friendship and the opportunity to have worked with Arthur Mitchell.
Oh yeah.
But when it was time to leave and move on, I realized at that point that I'd gotten the museum bug, that I liked the idea of working across disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
It was invigorating. But I also felt it was time for us to invade the corporate world.
When you say invade the corporate world, what do you mean?
Real artists going out there. I still have my law degree, so I knew I was going to use law in a way that was still going to facilitate art and entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt that it was time for those of us who came from the nonprofit, fine arts world,
mm-hmm.
to also influence the non-fine arts world.
Got it.
And I got a headhunter, basically headhunted me to go in to be vice president of business affairs for DePass Entertainment.
As in Suzanne DePass, right?
As in Suzanne DePass. And that's what brought me back home. I
see. So that was like a brief stop before becoming executive director of the California African American Museum.
Yeah,
you were working.
A stop before that. I was her vice president of business affairs and did the deals for talent and product
mm-hmm.
that was going into programs that she did.
Uh-huh.
I was there when she did the Temptations movie, and when she was running Smart Guy, and the Maori Sisters television show, Sister Sister,
Right.
and several other things, and in fact, including Motown 25. And I was working for her then, putting a lot of those deals together, and working with all of the other attorneys that were on the outside of the past entertainment.
Right.
Um, by this time, cable and everything starting to come in, it's real clear that the whole development deal thing, the way Hollywood was working, was changing.
Mm-hmm.
And I went and left, and I got headhunted to go to Disney.
Oh.
And I was recruited and became director of show development for Disney Entertainment Production at the Disneyland Resort. So I was responsible for overseeing all of the creative content that went into the development of Disneyland Resort and the opening for Disney's California Adventure in downtown Disney.
Was there anything else in between?
Literally is that I was there for about 3.5 years. Was there during 9/11.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And the only reason for sort of playing that out, even for anybody who's listening or wondering, is that I can sit back and tell you that because I never was, other than dancing, I never had a career path.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some people like have it all ticked out. Every job trained me for a skill set that built on the last skill set and for the next skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And so that by the time I went to be at Disney, first off, I was an executive at Disney, and there were no other people of color who were in charge of content. Mm. I didn't know that until after I got there.
Uh-huh.
And we all went to take a picture, and 125 executives lined up in the Lincoln Theater. And I looked around and I realized
you were the only one.
Yeah, there was an Asian in finance, and someone Black in one of the operational departments. But all the choreographers and the musicians and the artists and the singers and the dancers and all of those people reported to me. And we put together the show. So we put together about $16 million worth of programs for Disney that were both on stage, off stage. When I say on stage, I mean seen in the park, as well as special events and all of the new programming that went in there. So it gave me a great opportunity to go to people like Jeffrey Holder and have him bring in a parade design that didn't even have any cars in it, and Raul Rodriguez and Jacques Heim, who runs Diavolo, put together and choreographed an artistic stunt show for us for Disney's California Adventure in the Hollywood land. And,
you know, you bring up Jeffrey Holder. I think he's a wonderful example of a blend. I mean, here he was a dancer, choreographer, but he was also a visual artist. And
an extraordinary writer.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So he kind of brought together various aspects of the arts.
Oh, he was working on when he came into us for Disney, he was working on he was trying to do an entire production of the Bible.
Wow.
I mean, there were no small ideas in his head.
Well, that's an enormous idea.
Yeah. And for Disney, when he came back with an idea, he had designed a parade for Disney's California Adventure there were going to be no cars, all the costumes. Now remember, he designed Dance Street of Harlem's Firebird costume. Mm. And one of their other famous ballets, Douglas. Mm-hmm. And he was just, and the winner for the costumes for the Wiz, etc. And he designed a parade where all the costumes were like images of things, not images, but huge. So you would be a big, gigantic poppy seed and sunflower.
Right.
And they were going to move en masse through the streets. I mean, he was just a delight. Just to sit in the hotel room with him
must have been inspirational.
Yeah, it was amazing. But later on, it was in my time at the California African American Museum where we curated the concept of doing a show on Jeffrey Holder and Carmen de Lavallade.
Yeah.
And
His
Chicago
wife, we
did
should
it
say.
first, and then we revised it.
Yeah. So that's what I want to spend a little bit of time on the California African American Museum. Now, I should preface that by saying your uncle, John Riddle, the artist, was a curator at that same museum, I think prior to your arrival, right?
And he's responsible. You have to understand, he's actually responsible for me going after that job. I had been recruited to come to the California African American Museum in the early 90s, before he was there. But I was still living in New York, and they offered me the job, and I ended up having to turn it down because, one, the amount of money wasn't high enough for me to move across country, and they weren't going to pay my moving expenses. You know, the California African American Museum is also a government agency.
Right.
So they weren't going to pay the moving expenses and et cetera. And I just couldn't do it to my family.
Mm-hmm.
My husband's a music attorney. He had a business there. It was like, okay, I can't do this. And so I turned it down. Later, Johnny comes and becomes the curator at CAAM. And boy, did he do a fabulous job.
I just want to echo that. I mean, he definitely did a fabulous job.
He did a fabulous job.
He was wonderful.
The year he died, 2002, we were at a family pool party, like for the 4th of July or something. We're all sitting around. He was in town. He's obviously working there. And they were looking for a new director. And he told me I should apply. Mm-hmm. And I looked at him and said, there's no way in heaven I want to be your boss. Could you
right. I could see where that could be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, that wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
And so we sat there and we talked about it and et cetera. He said, no, I think you should do it. And I said, yeah. And I went on about my business. And then he, unfortunately, that November had a stroke. And the job was still open at the time that he passed. And I walked in there and stood there and asked him, what do you want me to do? And I applied. And
not only did you apply, but they accepted you and you accepted them and you became the executive director. By the way, there's I remember you saying when we first started this that you can barely see from your perspective see me but I don't know if you could tell or not, but next to me.
I can see the artwork of John Riddle behind you.
That's exactly right. Before Columbus, because John, as you pointed out, he passed away sadly at a far too young of an age in the year 2002. And I just want to mention that he was actually working on some works to show in my gallery at the time. And this is not one of them, but this is a piece, obviously, that he completed before that, and sometime in the 90s, I want to say. And it embodies his idea that, you know, the African people of African descent have a lot to be proud of, and you know, a lot of talent in terms of scientific minds and philosophical minds, all this wonderful talent, a lot of which ended up at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean during the Middle Passage, and so. You know, anyway, that's some of the themes that he was exploring.
But I don't know. Did you sell CAAM? Because one of the last pieces he made was Profit and Loss.
Actually, yes, that was right. That was actually in a show. I had a group show. It wasn't just his work, but other artists of African descent in my gallery, and that was one of the pieces in the show, and that did get purchased by the museum. That's exactly right.
Yes, it is.
Profit and Loss.
Yes, it is. And when I came to CAAM, they had put up a tribute show to him. Mm-hmm. And they had gone to Golden State, which had several of his works.
Right. And we're talking about the Golden State Mutual Insurance Company for those of you who don't know.
Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company, right. And which had so many of his works, and another one of your artists, Bill Pajot, and so many other great artists who had been here in the city, and who were all close friends together as well. Mm-hmm. And they put the show together. And I looked at it and realized, you guys haven't captured the totality of the range of his work, and you're only going to get to do this once.
Right.
We need to expand this show. I mean, the show was already open.
Right.
Because I was there for the opening, and people didn't know I was going to be coming in as the director at the time.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I knew it, but it wasn't a public notice yet. And we went in and we added some of his sculptural pieces.
Yeah.
We have his bombing of the Birmingham church.
Wow.
Of the little girls.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you want to think about somebody of influence, Johnny was an enormous influence, and there are two pieces of his that I absolutely. It's when he's the one that made me realize that something could happen to me because I was Black.
Uh-huh.
When the little girls got killed in '63, they were about the same age I was when they bombed the church in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And Johnny immediately went out and made a ceramic sculpture of that work.
Right.
I mean, of that incident.
Mm-hmm.
And he was starting in his ceramic style to use that kind of geometric form.
Mm-hmm.
We all get used to seeing sometimes in his work.
Right.
And he and it would sit on our my parents had some Danish furniture, so it was kind of low.
Uh-huh.
And I would sit on the floor, and that sculpture sat on the table, and I would stare at it because you could see bodies,
right,
and a hand, and the roof caved in, and people hugging. And that piece, as a little girl, stuck with me. So when Johnny died and the show was up, I asked my mother if we could put the piece in the show.
And she agreed?
And she agreed. And so we built a case and we put that piece and a couple of other of his early ceramic works in the show. And when the show came down and I went to give it back to her, she told me, "You keep it." So to this day, it sits on a low table next to the same lamp it did as a kid.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Which is very Danish modern kind of lamp.
Yeah.
With a ceramic base, and I put it in. It was in the recent show that Jill Moniz curated
at the Craft Museum. Exactly. This piece, by the way, was also in that show. The one that's on
that piece was in the show.
Yeah.
Profit and Loss was in the show.
Profit and Loss.
Wait, I got one more for you. Wait, don't go away.
I'm not. Oh, wow. There we go. She popped it up. That is awesome. I'm so glad. That's beautiful. Tell us the title of that piece. I recognize it, but please tell.
Right. It's a cutout of it. And another one. Wait, I got one more for you.
Oh, my goodness. Look at this. It's a special treat.
Now, Nixon would not have come through you. This piece, I'm going to move away for.
Yeah. That's Nixon with an X across his face in the middle.
Right. And if you could see it up close, it's the picture where Sammy Davis Jr. and Nixon were hugging.
Oh, right.
For those not old enough to remember, there was this moment where Sammy Davis Jr. grabbed Nixon from behind.
Right.
And someone took a picture of it.
Yeah.
It got perceived.
Pretty controversial. Yeah. A lot of people were kind of ticked off at that.
Yeah, it was very controversial, but and it was kind of taken out of context. But anyway, Johnny took that piece. And this was now when he's going through his collage phases, etc.
Yeah.
And this piece was owned by his brother Paul.
Uh-huh.
He had given it to Paul. And when Paul, at some point when Paul got sick and Johnny's had long since passed, and Paul got sick with prostate cancer. And he, one day he just came by the house and he just handed it to me.
Huh.
He said, I
think
just
gave it to you.
Yes.
Wow.
So it hangs over the piano.
You are so very fortunate, by the way.
I know, catty corner too. But that notion of Johnny making things where you study what's there I mean, even putting this back up a minute,
Yeah.
you've got the over in the on the over what is my right shoulder,
Right.
the John Carlos from the Olympics.
Right. The
You
guys who
know,
raise their fist when the playing of the national
exactly.
anthem.
You can see you've got cotton pickers in here.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is nothing. There was always so much detail in his work.
Yeah. And a lot of symbolism.
A lot of symbolism and very clean in his lines. So even the profit and loss piece that you sold to CAAM, when people look at it,
Mm-hmm.
was extraordinarily detailed. Wait a minute, I think I can do this for you. I'm going to put this in front of my face.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And basically to the viewing and listening audience, it's kind of coming in and out, right? But it's essentially it's an assemblage, and it really is very nice.
Yeah, it's fabulous. And it was when I came into CAAM, when we did museum notes in January to March 2004, we put it on the front cover.
Fantastic. Now, Charmaine, we're running out of time, but
I'm terrible. I'm so sorry.
No, I'm not saying that to get you to apologize, but I just want to make sure that people will hear the fact that there's an ancestral relationship to Carter G. Woodson, the person who actually established what was first Negro History Week and later became Black History Month, the second African-American to earn a PhD from Harvard University. You guys are related. Now, can you just briefly touch on that?
So let's relate him through your artist first, because he was the nephew of my great-great-grandfather, John Morton Riddle, who was the father of John Riddle Sr., John Riddle Jr., whose artwork is right next to you's father. And what was John Riddle Jr.'s grandfather and my great-grandfather, who was a slave, was Carter G. Woodson's first teacher. And he was he was the brother of Carter G. Woodson's mother, Anna Liza Riddle. So when you see the Anna Liza Riddle name, Anna Liza Riddle Woodson, that would have been the grand aunt of the artist who's sitting right next to you.
That is just phenomenal. I'm getting chill bumps as you explain it, because the small world cliche, as it turns out, is so true. I mean, this is incredible.
And the reason we're so when you think about things being fortuitous, and why I would urge everybody, ask people questions, write things down. We know what we know. It is so empowering to be able to know who your ancestors were, and even down to who the slave owner was.
Yes.
Because Carter G. Woodson wrote it down.
Yeah. Oh no. Very well documented, and the research is incredible. I know my father, when he was an undergrad, studied Carter G. That was part of his curriculum. He went to a historically Black college, Southern University in Louisiana, and that the writings of Carter G. Woodson were required reading, which was fantastic, I think.
Which I'm very grateful to hear. And for those listening, the one thing that's important to understand about Carter G. Woodson, it's not just that he founded Negro History Week. And no, it wasn't because it was the shortest month. It was because
I know. I used to ask people that in my art appreciation class. So why is February? And I had to explain to them, no, it's because of the coincidence.
I know. We have a lot of things we can a lot of things we can mow over, but it's not because it's the shortest.
It's not the shortest month, right?
But he was very in our family. This, if you want to know where John Riddle comes from, at Thanksgiving or Christmas, these were political debates in our house and conversations. And my mother was a war protester, and I was a war protester, and Johnny, and all of that kind of reveling that we did, as powerfully as they do these days and beyond.
Yeah.
And Carter G. Woodson was an activist. But he was the kind of activist that would say to people, well, if they won't let you eat at the lunch counter, then you need to not go. in that store.
Right.
He
Don't.
was not conformist. And so he started a publishing business.
Mm-hmm.
He would write about things that people didn't think we should spend time writing about,
Right.
glorified our culture in ways that others weren't paying enough attention to.
Yep.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was, if you really get to know him,
Yeah.
you would know that he was rubbing people.
Yeah. So in the couple of minutes that we have remaining, I just wanted everybody to hear what you're up to, what you will be up to in the near future and beyond. What are you doing nowadays? And because you have your own consulting firm for one thing, right?
I do. It's Kélan Resources, and it allows me to work with organizations all over the country. I'm a consultant to the International Association of Blacks in Dance, so I still get to have my first love.
Ah, excellent.
But I also work with museums and historic houses around the country, which allows me to spend a lot of time digging into histories and things, and in locations that I never would have thought I would be. But one of them includes Savannah, Georgia, and the house that General Sherman met with the 20 Black freedmen, where they came up with the idea of 40 acres and a mule.
Oh, wow. How exciting is that?
I mean, I'm blessed every day that I've learned something new. And the Gothic architecture of this building, it's called the Green Meldrum House. People can look it up.
Uh-huh.
See, it is amazing, but it is when General Sherman came into Savannah to overtake Georgia.
Right.
The man who owned it had been a slave owner and etc. and a big trader, but he wasn't going to have his house and stuff burned down. So he told General Sherman, "Oh, don't stay over there. Stay in my house."
Ah, as a way to preserve it.
Stayed there.
Yeah.
And came back there. Yes, but it is in that house that the 20 Black Africans had some who had been slaves, some who had been free,
right,
met and talked about the 40 acres, and then
mule.
later the decision that there'd be a mule, and there would have been one if Lincoln hadn't been shot.
Well, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much, Charmaine, for spending time with us today, sharing your perspective. It's been very enlightening and entertaining for me to talk with you. Thanks again.
Thank you also for everything you do to uplift so many extraordinary artists.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And so out there, I want everybody to be sure to not forget to subscribe. Thanks a lot for joining us.
All right. Thank you.